will not be judged by the color of my skin, but by the truth I carry.
Ma'am, we follow protocol here.
Protocol should protect dignity, not distress it.
Dignity is not my concern. Procedure is.
The words hung in the air like smoke no window could clear. Around them, the marble lobby seemed to shrink, every whisper swallowed by the weight of what had just been said. Faces turned, cameras steadied, and the silence that followed was no longer ordinary. It was the silence before a storm. Was this the instant when justice would finally break through the shell of authority, or would power tighten its grip once more? This story has only begun, and what comes next will shake the room even harder. If you believe moments like this matter, leave one word in the comments. Justice, and don't forget to follow for the next chapter. The street glittered with holiday lights as shoppers drifted along Fifth Avenue, their scarves lifting in the slight winter wind. Inside the Wells Fargo branch, brass fixtures and polished marble held a soft, steady warmth. Baristas across the avenue had just handed out a rush of lattes. The fragrance of cinnamon rolled in on coats and followed people to the teller line. Monica Harris paused at the entry, shook the snow from her sleeves, and took in the room the way a traveler takes in a train schedule, quietly, completely, with an understanding that timing would matter. She greeted the nearest guard with a polite ma'am, then crossed the lobby with the calm posture of someone who made plans and kept them. She had chosen the simplest clothes she owned. A gray knit cardigan, dark denim, low heels that would not click loudly on marble. In her bag, a check lay tucked in a leather folder, heavy with meaning. A brass clock above the customer service desk marked the early winter afternoon without urgency. Across the floor, the manager Richard Collin leaned on the counter, smiling in the way some men smile when they assume they have already won. Beside him stood Linda Baker, the assistant manager, alert but reserved, watchful, in the manner of someone accustomed to smoothing edges after others made them sharp. Monica joined the queue, exchanged small talk with a woman admiring the branch's towering tree, and let the gentle choir music fill the space between question and answer. New York at Christmas time has a way of softening people's voices, and Monica let the softness steady her. She had learned long ago that kindness and firmness could coexist. She used both now as a shield and a compass. When her turn came, she stepped to the desk and greeted Linda first, because courtesy is a kind of introduction to the deeper truth of a person. "Good afternoon," Monica said. "I need to deposit and verify a check." "Of course," Linda replied. "May I see identification?" Monica opened the folder with care. The check was written for $2,347,000 and some cents, an amount that had meaning far beyond its size. It represented years of patient work, quarterly discipline, a promise kept between partners. The paper itself had the quiet gravitas of official print and watermarks. Linda's eyes skimmed the line items, the signature, the issuing office seal. Her brows drew together, not with suspicion, exactly, but with the caution of someone trained to move only as fast as certainty allowed. Before Linda could speak again, Richard appeared, drawn by a mixture of curiosity and something more brittle. "I'll take this one, Linda," he said, extending his hand for the check the way a principal reaches for a contraband note. His cufflinks flashed when he turned toward Monica. "Big paper for such a casual afternoon, ma'am." Monica met his gaze evenly. "I appreciate your help." He tilted the check beneath the lamp, lifted it to eye level, then let his attention drop, not to the signature line, but to Monica's cardigan, her plain leather bag, the tiny spot of salt on the shoe that city sidewalks tend to gift in winter. "Interesting," he murmured, as if the word itself were evidence. A couple at the rope line angled their faces to watch. A college kid near the entrance held the phone a little higher than necessary, recording without pretending not to. Linda cleared her throat. "Richard, I was about to run verification." "In a moment," he said brightly, stepping back so his voice carried. "We like to be thorough, especially with unusually large amounts." People in line lifted their chins the way people do when they suspect a show is about to start. The banker's smile widened. He turned the check over, tapped the paper as if it might confess something. "Tell me about the source of funds, Miss Harris." It is a quarterly dividend," Monica said simply. "Is it now?" His eyebrows climbed with theatrical interest. "And the issuing entity?" "Harris Capital," she answered. You will find the authorizing resolution attached to your internal record. No. A man balanced a paper cup and whispered to his companion, that is a lot of zeros. And then, remembering himself, he lowered his voice and corrected, a lot of money. The choir hummed in the ceiling speakers, a tender carol about goodwill that made the checkpoint of the moment feel sharper by contrast. Monica could feel the familiar press of judgment moving across the room like a weather front, subtle at first and then undeniable. Richard's tone shifted from bright to brittle. It is curious, Miss Harris, that someone would bring so substantial a check without an appointment and without, say, a professional presentation. Monica kept her voice even. I have always believed the branch floor is for everyone. Indeed. His smile thinned. Linda, do you see a high-value appointment for this afternoon? I do not recall one. Linda's fingers hovered above the keyboard. No flagged appointments. But we can ensure our standards, Richard said. He glanced again at Monica's shoes, then at the phone-wrist college kid, then at a woman in a Chanel coat who had drifted closer. The woman gave a small nod toward Richard, a nod that said, I trust you to keep things proper. It only takes 1 or 2 nods like that for a manager's shoulders to square. Monica sensed the room narrowing, decisions happening not in policy but in posture. She studied Linda's face, found there a flicker of hesitation, and placed a quiet trust in it. Trust, she knew, was both risk and bridge. I am happy to wait while you verify, she said. Richard held the check at an angle again, then glanced up with an expression that asked for applause he had not yet earned. You know, he said, we deal with sophisticated counterfeit every season. People get bold in December. He turned toward the side counter, where a small metal tray held a lighter used for sealing documents with wax during special presentations. His hand hovered over it, and the air in the room shifted to attention. Richard, Linda said softly, let us run the verification call. He did not answer her. He addressed Monica instead, as if the rest of the room had become a supporting cast. I am sure you understand that our responsibility is to protect depositors and the integrity of this institution. He sounded like a brochure written to justify what a person had already decided to do. Monica placed her wallet on the counter with measured care. A black card peeked from one slot, but she did not present it as theater. Protecting the institution, she said, always begins with protecting dignity. Silence softened the edges of her words. Somewhere near the door, a stroller squeaked. Outside, a taxi horn gave a single polite tap. On the phone screens that had multiplied across the lobby, little red lights glowed the way embers do before anyone notices a fire has begun. Richard lifted the check again and held it between finger and thumb. He traced the bank seal with a nail, then looked at Monica as if she had entered the room carrying not paper but a performance. I have seen exceptional forgeries, he said lightly, some of them nearly charming. Monica's hands remained still at her sides. She remembered a grandmother who had once told her not to rush a person trying to show you who they are. She let the moment stretch until it showed her everything she needed to see. Linda shifted her weight. The Chanel coat woman edged closer. The college kid whispered a running commentary for an audience that would grow whether it deserved to or not. Miss Harris, Linda tried again. May I please see your identification so I can begin the standard process? Monica met Linda's eyes. Of course. She produced her driver's license, placed it beside the folder, and offered a small, grateful smile. It was a delicate transfer of trust across the counter, the kind people perform every day in ordinary rooms that hold the possibility of grace. Richard set the check down and, with an efficiency that looked practiced, slid it back toward himself. We will proceed, he announced, as if the announcement itself could absolve the tone beneath it. He turned slightly so the crowd could better watch him be decisive. The clerk at a nearby desk pretended to staple something. A guard stepped to the side, not blocking, only occupying space in the way that makes people change their path. Monica lifted her chin the slightest degree and folded her hands together. Patience, she knew, was not passive. It was a way of deciding who you were before someone else tried to decide for you. Richard asked a few perfunctory questions about the issuing date and the destination account, Questions that sounded procedural but were delivered like a quiz in which failure was preordained, Monica answered without embellishment. When he paused, she added, "Your system will show board-level authorization for disbursement." He blinked at the phrase board level as if it were a party she had named without an invitation. He repeated it softly, testing how it would play in a room that had begun to lean toward spectacle. "Board level," he said, then smiled, as though that settled something in his favor. Outside, a gust pushed snow into a little spiral that twirled and collapsed, then rose again. The brass clock above the desk ticked forward with the calm entitlement of clocks. Monica's phone, face down in her bag, began to vibrate once, then again a scheduled reminder she had no intention of honoring until necessary. She breathed slowly and kept her gaze on Linda, because believing in one steady face is sometimes the difference between a room turning toward fairness or toward harm. Linda took the license and began to type. Names, addresses, cross-checks. Her mouth tightened briefly, the way a person's mouth does when the facts on the screen contradict the story a room is telling itself. Before she could speak, Richard cleared his throat and touched the lighter, a glint on metal like a small, dangerous star. A man in a wool cap said, "This is getting interesting." A woman near the rope line said, "It is about time someone ran a tight ship." The college kid's camera steadied. Snow tapped the glass in dry whispers. Monica folded, the folder closed and rested both palms on it. The gesture of someone anchoring herself without trying to anchor anyone else. She felt the familiar ache that comes when performance matters more than policy, when tone outruns truth, when the person's first read of you tries to become the whole story. She steadied her breath. She thought of the reason she had come to this branch in person rather than delegating. Because dignity is easier to measure when you feel it, and easier to repair when you witness where it is broken. Richard leaned in, eyebrows lifted, as if he were about to deliver a punchline that required the world to agree with him. "Large checks sometimes arrive with lovely tales," he said. "We prefer facts." He kept his voice bright. The brightness was a kind of dare. Monica looked at him without blinking. "Then let us keep to facts." For a moment, even the holiday music seemed to hold its breath. Linda's hands paused on the keyboard. The guard adjusted her stance by a fraction. The room felt like a stage where two actors had very different scripts, and the audience could not yet tell which one would be believed. In that suspended second, Monica sensed that she was standing at the seam between what had been tolerated and what could be corrected. Richard tightened the check in his hand, a spark in his eyes hinting at a decision Monica could not yet foresee. A flicker of doubt had already moved through the line after the manager's bright speech about standards, and that doubt turned the crowd into an audience. The lobby's lights threw a soft sheen across the marble, and the holiday carol slid gently along the ceiling vents, sweet and steady in a way that made the tension feel even sharper. Richard Collins held the check up like a prop beneath a lamp and gave the room a look that invited approval. A woman in a Chanel coat drifted closer. A college kid near the vestibule angled his phone higher. A pair of tourists with paper cups paused, the cinnamon steam curling between them. The branch had become a little theater, and the director had found his mark. He reached for the small silver lighter capped on the side counter for ceremonial seals, thumb resting on the wheel as if it were a microphone. "In this season," he said, cheerful and crisp, "we see all sorts of creativity." He let the last words sparkle in the air. He looked at Monica Harris, not at her eyes but at her cardigan and plain leather bag, at the salt bloom on a shoe. Then he looked past her to the faces that waited for him to be decisive. When he flicked the wheel, the flame rose with a soft sigh. Linda Baker's breath caught. "Richard," she said, voice held carefully low, "we have verification steps. Let me call." In a moment, he answered brightly. The flame painted a warm triangle on the paper. The holiday music did not pause. It simply sounded farther away, as if the room had slid a few inches from kindness. Monica did not reach forward. She did not plead or grasp or protest. She watched the fire, and in her stillness there was a quiet assertion. Dignity does not flinch. The edge of the check darkened to caramel, then to coal. The air turned astringent, like burnt sugar with something metallic beneath it. A college kid whispered, "Whoa," and then remembered to say, For the benefit of the recording, this is wild. Someone else murmured a small approval, the sort people offer when they think order is being restored to a place that belongs to them. The paper hunched in on itself and then sighed downward, ash feathering onto the marble in slow black confetti. Richard held the shrinking rectangle aloft, smiling as if he were making a toast. He lowered it with theatrical care and let the last burning corner fall. The ember kissed the floor, smoldered, and went out. He pressed the ashes with the sole of his Italian shoe, grinding slowly as if polishing the floor. "We are a vigilant institution," he announced, voice pitched to Carrie. "This is how we keep our community safe." The room answered him without speaking. You could feel it in the tilt of chins, in the little nod from the Chanel coat, in the guard shifting her stance to a place that made passage narrower. Linda's fingers hovered above the keyboard again, clenched briefly, then released. She looked at Monica, and in that glance sat a jumble of regret, worry, and an accountant's hunger for procedure. Monica's eyes moved over the faces, the eager, the curious, the relieved. She heard a stroller wheel squeak, a coffee cup lid snap into place, the far-off three-note jingle of a door sensor. She remembered her grandmother's counsel about storms. You cannot change the wind, but you can know where you are standing. She drew in a breath that felt measured against decades rather than minutes, and spoke in the voice that did not rise. "You just destroyed a financial instrument on the branch floor," she said to Richard, almost gently. "Please return my wallet." He had taken it without ceremony earlier, the way a teacher might remove a note from a child who was sure she needed it. Now he gave the room a sideways smile and patted his jacket as if to confirm the trophy still rolled there. "Of course," he said, easy and bright. He did not return it. Instead, he looked at the spread of ash, tapped the toe of his shoe against it, and said, "We do not accept fantasy here." From the vestibule, the college kids live-streamed found purchase. Comments skittered upward like sparks. The words were not kind. Some were about money. Some were about race. Some were those thin, poisonous jokes that lack discrimination, disguise itself as humor. A second phone rose across the lobby, then a third. Chloe Ramirez, a young woman with a denim jacket and quick eyes, lifted her camera and gave the internet a steady lens. "Live on Fifth Avenue," she said evenly, not adding fire where there was already flame. Manager just burned a check on the marble. Richard smoothed his tie, as if the tie were part of policy. "Security." He called in a voice that tried to make authority sound like comfort. "Please ask Miss Harris to wait by the chairs." The guard moved without haste, palms open, posture practiced. Monica nodded to her, not as surrender, but as recognition. This was a person doing a job inside a structure whose rules were being rewritten on the fly. "Miss Harris," Linda said, finding the edge of courage she had been stepping on with worry, "I would like to run the verification call. If you would allow—" "Thank you," Monica said. "I would appreciate that." She sat in the leather chair nearest the window, set her folder on her lap, and let the outside light frame the room in winter silver. Across the glass, Fifth Avenue flowed. Yellow cabs, black SUVs, knit hats, red scarves, a bus sighing at the curb. The world beyond the branch did not know, yet, that inside this polished room, something small and ordinary had just become a marker of something large. Richard took the center again, drawing the circle in tighter. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said to the people who had decided to be an audience, "this is why we pay attention." He gestured to the ash. He gestured to Monica in the chair. He gestured to the phones as if they, too, were employees who needed to be managed. Fraud does not take holidays. The Chanel coat made a soft, approving sound. The tourist with the cinnamon steam nodded. A businessman in a navy suit said, "Finally," and then lowered his voice in case he had said it too loudly. Words in the livestream chat multiplied, some applauding, some sharp with the easy cruelty of distance. Chloe steadied her camera on a small tripod she carried in her bag and spoke quietly to her audience. "We're witnessing an unusual decision," she said. "I am going to keep recording." Monica kept her hands composed. She did not fix the crowd with a stare or perform anger for the cameras. She thought about mornings at her neighborhood diner where the waitress called customers honey. and slid extra bacon onto plates for veterans. She thought about how easily dignity could be extended with a word. She thought about how quickly people forget that fairness is a service you offer, not a reward you withhold. She let those thoughts anchor her feet to the floor. A second guard entered from the hallway, cheeks pink from the cold. "What do we have?" he asked quietly. The first guard gave him the summary the room had already written for itself. High-value counterfeit. Manager has neutralized the risk. Neutralized. The word landed like a paperweight. Linda returned from her desk with a whisper of shoe leather. "Richard," she said, just barely louder than the music. "Policy requires preservation of suspected documents for verification. We do not destroy them." He did not turn his head. "Noted," he said. The word rang empty in the big room. He tilted his chin toward Chloe's camera. "Please do not film our staff without consent," he added, wanting to reassert a rule that had not been challenged a moment before. Chloe said, "I am standing in a public lobby and recording a matter of public interest," and kept her lens steady. A man by the door cleared his throat and addressed Monica, as if the measure of the moment were his to set. "If it was real," he said, with the offhand assurance of someone who has never had to prove himself on sight, "why bring it dressed like that?" The rudeness startled him as soon as it left his mouth. He turned away as if he could pull it back by not looking at it. Monica let the sting pass through and out. She had learned that some people need to hear their own words aloud in order to recognize them. The ash had spread in a small crescent, soot gleaming like mica where the light struck it. Children would have leaned close to pinch the sparkling bits because children are drawn to what glitters. But the lobby had no children, only grown people practicing certainty. Richard circled the scatter as if it were an achievement, then pivoted toward the room. "This," he said, "is how we handle it." And for a beat, the branch accepted that sentence like liturgy. Then the holiday carol rose for its last line and ended. And in the half second of silence before the next song began, Linda stepped closer to Monica's chair. "Ma'am," she said, using the word the way a nurse uses a hand on a forearm, "I am going to pull the regional verification line. It will only take a moment." "Thank you," Monica replied. Her voice was even, but a line of steel ran under it. She kept her gaze level, felt her phone vibrate once in her bag, and let it. She could name the meeting by heart, could see the conference room in her mind, the glass wall, the long table, the stack of agendas already squared. She did not move toward the door. Not yet. Chloe's viewfinder caught the ash pile and panned to Monica's face, then to Richard's posture. She said to the camera, "Viewers, I will post the branch policy link if I can find it. Please be respectful in the comments." The chat surged anyway. A handful of voices tried to slow the rush with simple truths. "You do not know her. You cannot tell worth by a sweater. Do not cheer the fire." The better comments never trend as quickly, but they steady the ground under the rest. In the far corner, a teller who had been pretending to stack forms stopped pretending and watched openly. The guard shifted again to give Monica more space, not because she had been told to, but because a person inside a uniform had remembered being human first. Linda dialed, waited, listened. Richard adjusted his tie a second time, and then a third, as if the knot were a lever that could crank the day back into his favor. He looked at the ash once more, then made his declaration to the phones and to the ceiling. "We do not reward fantasy here," he said. "We protect our customers. We protect the bank." He pointed with two fingers toward the soot as if it were a chart demonstrating victory. "This is how we handle fraud." Or, the sentence ran with the satisfaction of a verdict. Some heads nodded, a few tilted away. Linda closed her eyes for the space of a breath and pressed the phone to her ear. Monica did not move from the chair. She held herself with the stillness of someone who understands that the most generous power is the one that waits until all eyes are open. From the vestibule, the college kid whispered into his mic, "He actually burned it." And then, eager to feed the algorithm, "Manager is savage." Chloe did not repeat the word. She centered Monica in the frame, the way a journalist centers a truth that has not yet been recognized. Snow shouldered softly against the glass, then slid down in thin streams that caught the streetlights. Outside, a cab driver tapped the horn once in apology and waved someone across. Inside, a mop bucket glided from a back hallway and then halted, the custodian reading the room and deciding that Ash, for now, would remain evidence of something people needed to see. Monica looked at her watch. Only 12 minutes until the important meeting. A faint smile touched her mouth, puzzling those who saw it. The first uploads rippled across feeds like thrown pebbles, each circle widening into the next. Within minutes, clips of a bank manager burning a check appeared on story bars and stitched timelines. A teenager near the vestibule held his phone at chest level and whispered to his audience that they were watching something unbelievable on Fifth Avenue. Chloe Ramirez, steady behind her camera, framed the marble floor and the small crescent of ash without dramatizing it. Her voice, low and even, explained that she would keep recording until someone with authority explained what had just happened. The holiday carol above the lobby changed to a softer hymn, and the lights along the huge tree blinked in patterns that felt almost apologetic. The building itself seemed to lean in. You could feel a thickness in the air, that moment before rain when people glance upward and wonder if they should find shelter. Richard Collins used the thickness like a stage. He moved to the center of sightlines, with the easy rhythm of a man who had practiced looking in charge. He smoothed his tie again, spoke in the register, meant to reassure, and pointed a careful hand toward the waiting chairs. He asked security to keep the aisles open. He reminded the room and the phones that the branch took its responsibility seriously. His words were crisp and public, but a private satisfaction hung beneath them, a self-approval that made his smile look polished rather than warm. Monica Harris sat by the window where the cold light pooled, her folder closed on her lap, her hands folded on the folder. She greeted the guard who had taken the position to her left and thanked her for the courtesy of space. Her voice capped the ma'am that softens edges in American rooms. She did not glance at the ash. She glanced instead at Linda Baker, whose fingers hovered near a keyboard as if the right words might require flight to land. Outside, yellow cabs sighed at the curb, and a pair of tourists in wool hats sipped their coffees and tried to see past their own reflections to the drama behind the glass. On the live streams, comments poured like a weather system. Some voices urged caution. Some celebrated what they imagined to be heroics. Some drew quick, careless lines between clothing and character. Chloe did something rare for a person with an audience. She asked people to breathe. She asked them to be respectful. She said she would post a policy link when she found one. She whispered that she had a grandmother who always told her that fairness begins with how you talk to a stranger. The chat did what chat does at Surge anyway, but a few sentences anchored like stones in a strong current, and they steadied those who saw them. A businessman in a navy suit remarked to no one in particular that the bank had to send a message. A woman in a Chanel coat agreed in a tone that made agreement sound like perfume. A barista from across the avenue, off shift and drawn by rumor, drifted into the lobby still in a green apron and watched without speaking. At the far counter, a teller who had pretended to collate forms stopped pretending and simply stood still. The custodian with the mop bucket decided not to move at all, as if motion itself might blur something people needed to witness clearly. Monica's phone vibrated once in her bag, then again. It was a gentle nudge from a calendar that knew nothing about marble or ash. She pictured a glass-walled conference room, a long table, the familiar faces that expected her to appear with the punctuality of a clock. She kept her hands folded. She had always believed that courtesy is a kind of courage, and that patience is a choice you make before you need it. She breathed in the scent of coffee and evergreen and paper, and she let the room tell on itself without adding a word. Linda Baker found a narrow ledge of bravery and stepped onto it. She said, softly but in a voice built for work, that policy required preservation rather than destruction when a document was in doubt, and that verification could be completed quickly if she were allowed to make the call. She did not accuse. She did not scold. She offered procedure like a bridge. Richard answered her without turning his head, a bright note that did not travel far. Then he turned to the phones again and repeated the mission of the institution as if repeating it would make it so. The common count ticked upward into numbers so large, the human brain stops feeling them. You could sense the subtle way a crowd changes when it knows itself to be on camera, the tidying of posture, the little glance at one's own reflection in a polished surface, The pretense that nothing about one's behavior has shifted. A man near the rope line cleared his throat and told his companion that if a check had been real, it would have arrived with a suit and a briefcase. He said it softly enough to make it sound like common sense. His companion did not answer. She had grown up in a town where a farmer once walked into a bank in muddy boots and deposited more money than the town council had seen in a year, and she kept that memory in her silence. Security adjusted the perimeter by inches. The first guard took half a step back, making space rather than pressure. The second guard, new to the scene and flushed from the cold, asked a quiet question and received a quick, tidy summary that felt like a verdict rather than an observation. Every institution develops a script for moments like this. Every script risks turning people into props. Chloe kept her lens on Monica and Richard, then widened to include Linda. She said to her viewers that she wanted the recording to be fair, that she would not yell, that she would not make the moment about herself. A few people in the chat thanked her. Most ignored her. The internet rarely rewards restraint. The branch's brass clock marked the afternoon without apology. Outside, a bus knelt with a sigh to let a mother lift a stroller, and a driver waved a pedestrian across with a single tap of the horn. Inside, the smell of burnt paper had faded to something dry and papery, like the inside of an old dictionary. The ash glittered faintly where the tree light struck it. People rarely expect ash to glitter, and the surprise made several faces tilt. Richard resumed his posture at the center and raised his hands in a small settling motion, the sort of gesture an usher makes before a performance starts. He spoke again about vigilance. He spoke about community trust. He said that sometimes one must act firmly to protect the many. He did not look at Monica when he said it. He looked at the phones, as if the phones themselves were the many. A young man in a pea coat, shoulders tied with secondhand fear, nodded in relief as if the speech had contained a lullaby. A new figure entered the lobby and paused. She wore a tailored navy suit and carried a leather briefcase whose handle had been darkened by years of palms. Her gaze took in the ash, the cameras, the posture of the manager, the stillness of the woman in the chair by the window. She stepped toward the nearest onlooker and asked what had happened. The onlooker, grateful to be a narrator, offered the version already congealing in the room. A counterfeit check, a necessary response, a manager keeping things proper. The woman in the suit looked from the narrator to Monica and frowned, the way a person frowns when a story has too many neat corners. Linda's call to the regional verification line finally called a human being. She spoke quietly into the handset, offering names and amounts, routing codes and authorization phrases. Her voice grew steadier with each correct answer. She glanced at Monica, and a small professional nod passed between them, the kind of nod that holds both respect and apology. The live stream spiked again. Someone had posted a clip that showed the flame in slow motion, the edge of the paper curling, the ash falling like black snow. Another account had stitched it with a comment about rules, another with a comment about appearances, another with a laugh that borrowed its energy from spite. Chloe answered 3 questions at once with patience. She reminded her viewers that none of them had the whole story yet. She said she would keep filming until someone offered facts instead of theater. Monica finally reached into her bag and silenced the phone without looking at the screen. She thought about diners and church basements and barbershops, the small American rooms where truth travels from mouth to mouth more faithfully than it does through headlines. She thought about the phrase, benefit of the doubt, and how unevenly it is handed out in this world. How some people receive it in stacks and others are asked to sign for it, one reluctant slip at a time. She kept her shoulders level, she kept her breathing slow. A man near the door asked, loudly enough for the phones to catch it, why someone would bring a dividend check without a lawyer. The question sounded triumphal because it mistook unfamiliarity for guilt. No one answered him. From the corner, the teller who had stopped pretending to collate forms said, almost to herself, that she had seen very large deposits arrive inside very ordinary jackets. Her voice did not carry, but the truth of it seemed to alter the air by a fraction. The woman in the navy suit stepped closer now, close enough to see Monica's face, and something like recognition flickered there. Recognition and disbelief that such a face could be seated where it was, surrounded by phones and ash. She reached for her own device and began to record. She did not announce herself. She did not intervene. She gathered proof, as people do when they sense a moment that will need witnesses later. Linda covered the mouthpiece and said to Richard, careful to keep the tone respectful, that the original line was on hold and that she had preliminary confirmation of a board authorization. Richard's smile stiffened in the way smiles do when they are nailed to a face. He did not respond to Linda. He spoke again to the phones, tightening his voice into a certainty it did not deserve. He said that fantasy would not be rewarded here. He said that the bank was safe in his hands. He said that the community could rest easy. Monica stood only then, not with a jerk or a flourish, but with the steadiness of someone rising to greet a guest. She thanked the guard for her patience. She looked at Linda and nodded once. Then she slipped one hand into the inner pocket of her coat and withdrew a slim device whose weight held less metal than meaning. Monica stood up, pulled an iPad from her coat. The entire lobby went silent, waiting. The iPad woke with a muted glow that washed Monica's hands in the quiet rectangle of light. A soft chime threaded through the carol overhead, and for a beat, the lobby seemed to listen with her. Outside the glass, snow sifted past the streetlights in thin veils. Inside, the brass clock above the service desk kept its untroubled count. 1 minute before 3 in the afternoon. Monica did not raise her voice or her chin. She touched the screen with the sure motions of someone who knew, not simply hoped, that a door would open. The guard to her left steadied her stance by an inch. Less protection than respect. Linda Baker stood close enough to see the screen without crowding. Hands drawn together, knuckles pale where effort held them still. Chloe Ramirez tightened her framing and whispered to her audience that she would stay quiet so the room could hear. Monica entered a username and a passphrase, then a second passphrase that arrived from a secure token stored in the inner pocket of her coat. She navigated a familiar sequence of icons that made no attempt to be pretty. Rectangles for operations, lists for authorizations, and internal crest at the top left for governance. When the system accepted her keys, a narrow banner appeared across the top edge with a polite sound. Access granted. It displayed the name as if it had always lived there, waiting for its moment to be seen. Monica Harris Chair, Harris Capital. Majority stakeholder, Northeast Region. Board privileges enabled. She tilted the iPad to level it for Linda and, by extension, for the room. The HVAC's low breath stirred a paper flag by a pamphlet stand. Beyond that, there was no movement. People stare differently at a screen than at a person. A person can be argued with. A screen, when it carries the right seal and sits in the right hands, rearranges the weather inside the room. The Chanel coat's nod was gone. Her mouth had softened with the realization that she had nodded at a show while the play belonged to someone else. The tourist couple dropped their cups to their sides, the steam forgotten. The teenager by the vestibule whispered, "No way," and lifted his phone higher without realizing he had done it. Richard Collins, who had been speaking in declarative sentences for the better part of 10 minutes, encountered a sentence that did not need his voice. He tried to address the phones first, because the phones had been kind to him, but his words found less purchase now. Anyone can mock up an interface, he said, aiming for an easy skepticism that would float. It did not float. It clinged to the marble and rose somewhere under the counter where false assurances go to hide. He took a step closer to the iPad and stopped at the line that good sense draws for people who have ignored every other line. He smiled with visible effort. He asked Monica whether she had scheduled this demonstration with corporate communications. It was a strange question. The sort a person asks when the ground has tilted and he hopes protocol might wedge it level. Monica did not answer him with a joke or a lecture. She navigated 3 more screens, each one stubbornly institutional, with menus named for committees and subcommittees and a sprawling tree for permissions. She opened the ledger entry for the most recent disbursement and, with an economy of motion that came from long practice, showed the branch routing, the board resolution number, the counter signature, the distribution schedule, and the audit trail that looked like a page of stars. Linda read the fields aloud, not because they were difficult, but because saying true things in plain language is a way to turn a crowd from appetite back toward attention. Board authorization dated the first Monday of December, she said softly. Dividend disbursement to Miss Harris. Branch support required, she swallowed. Preservation of instruments for verification. The glow on Monica's hands lit the ash at her feet in the gray-blue sheen. It made the burned paper look like a map of a coastline, glittering where the tree lights kissed it. Chloe adjusted focus until the text was legible through her lens and then widened to include Monica's face. It was the face of someone who had packed an extra kindness for every place she went and had learned to keep it unopened until the room proved it deserved it. The room had not deserved it, and still she stayed kind. That, too, was part of the weather changing. From the speaker at the service desk, the regional verification line clicked in as if it had been there all along, listening for the moment when its voice would matter. Linda gave her name and title in a steady cadence, the way she had done 100 times for routine questions that never attracted a camera. She offered the facts without embroidery. The amount spelled in words, the issuing entity, the authorization string, the policy citation about preservation. The person on the other end asked to speak to the branch manager. Linda looked at Richard. He adjusted his tie and let the request pass him like a draft he did not feel obliged to close. "Sir," Linda said gently, "they are asking for you on the regional line." It was not a reprimand. It was a bridge. Richard gave her a smile that wanted to be a door and declined to walk through it. "Let them know I am handling it on site," he said, and the sentence landed with a dull sound. He took a breath and returned to the only tool that had worked for him so far, the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, Monica lifted the iPad a little higher. The crest of the bank's governance portal stamped the upper corner with the kind of authority that does not need applause. She tapped a tab that opened the page reserved for board certification, and the pane populated with a short, inarguable list, authorized users. Her name appeared at the top with the date of her election spelled out in stately words. Beneath it, a signature captured in digital ink that matched the signature on the resolution shown 2 taps back. She did not ask the room to trust her. She asked the room to read. Chloe drew a breath that her microphone almost caught and then kept herself from speaking. The chat in her live stream shifted in tone not all at once but in perceptible waves, like a crowd changing its mind about the weather. A handful of users wrote apologies as if the screen could accept them. Others went quiet. A stubborn line of comments tried to salvage the earlier story by offering new angles for the old assumption. It must be a staged performance. It must be a prank. It must be a trick with screenshots. People who have built their balance on prejudice need a hook to hang it on when the wall collapses. Monica let the new quiet find its size. Then she turned the screen back toward herself and, with a single deliberate tap, opened one more document, a statement addressed to the branch for courtesy support during high-value transactions. The word courtesy sat there with its old dignity, as if someone had polished it overnight and put it back on a shelf where people could see it again. She looked at Linda, not at Richard. "Thank you for your help," she said. "I am ready to proceed." Richard shifted, and the movement seemed to drop a temperature by a degree. "We have to be careful about impersonation," he said, clinging to the last rail available. "You understand?" He gestured in a way that suggested he might usher the truth back out the door if only someone would give him permission. "We cannot simply accept what someone brings into the lobby." "It is not simply what I brought," Monica said, the warmth in her voice intact. "It is what your system confirms." She kept the tone woven through with patience, because patience is heard where force is resisted. She did not add the obvious. He had accepted, without verification, the story he preferred 2 minutes earlier. She let the room add that line for itself. Linda cleared her throat. "Sir," she said, one notch firmer, "the regional line would like to confirm your observation of the interface and the identity of Miss Harris." The words were bureaucracy, but the sentiment underneath was simple. See what is in front of you. He made an involuntary sound, half laugh, half exhale, and for the first time looked at Monica fully. Not at her cardigan, not at her shoes, but at her. He encountered a person who had carried herself as if truth did not need a chaperone. He encountered, also, the outline of his own reflection, the way a mirror surprises you in the hallway when you are in a hurry. He pressed his lips together into the kind of smile that hopes to be mistaken for grace. "Miss Harris," he said, the honorific arriving late to the party, "if you would allow us some time to, coordinate." Monica did not sit again. She did not move toward him. She set the iPad on the counter so that the crest and the authorizations faced the room and rested her fingertips on either side of the device. It was the posture of someone who holds a door open rather than forcing it. The custodian in the corner eased his bucket forward a fraction, newly certain that he would be asked to clean ash and also newly reluctant to erase the evidence too quickly. The woman in the navy suit who had entered quietly and seen much took another step forward and watched with the particular intensity of someone filing away the details for a report that would matter later. The breast clock marked the hour with a sound so polite it seemed to apologize for interrupting. 2:30 had passed. Now it was the top of the hour that people call 3 in the afternoon, and the city adjusted its pace. Monica felt her phone vibrate again, the third reminder in a sequence that would have driven a different person to stand and leave. She kept it where it was. The meeting could begin without her. It could not finish correctly without what she was doing here. She lifted her gaze and, for the first time since the lighter's sigh, pitched her voice to the room rather than to one person in it. "There is a policy for doubt," she said, not scolding, simply offering a map, "and it does not involve fire." The sentence found solid ground. A small sound of assent rose near the rope line, and another near the counter where the teller stood. The guard to Monica's left exhaled, just a quiet easing of breath, and widened the space around the iPad by half a step. Richard's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at Chloe's lens and seemed to understand that performances are most fragile when facts have been invited onto the stage. He shifted his weight and found no new position that felt like command. Then he gambled on tone again, because tone had always been his ally. "We appreciate your cooperation," he told Monica, leaning hard on the word appreciate, as if it could tax and spend in a single breath. "We will be in touch after we complete additional internal reviews." "Now is better," Monica said. She did not raise an eyebrow to pin the absurdity of the phrase additional internal reviews to the wall. She offered the truth as service instead. "The board portal is live. Your original line is live. The authorizations are on your screen. We can be thorough and timely at the same time." The tree's lights blinked in the pattern and paused, the better to emphasize the next pattern. Out on Fifth Avenue, a taxi hummed through a slush lane, wipers keeping time with a song no one could hear from inside. In the live stream comments, a steady stream of viewers began typing the word "listen." It never trends. It is always the right word. He reached, finally, for the regional line. The handset looked heavy in his hand, the way metal feels heavy when the day has changed its composition. He gave his name and his branch, and a brief account that sounded like it had been written before the iPad woke. The person on the other end asked him to confirm what he could see. He hesitated and then described the crest, the authorization, the ledger entries, the resolution numbers spelled in words, the title beside the name. A pause filled the space between his description and the reply, and in that pause, the room learned a different kind of silence. It was not the hush of spectacle. It was the quiet of correction taking root. Richard's voice, when it returned, carried less resonance. He added a phrase about protecting the institution, reflects more than position. The person on the line offered next steps in a tone that did not ask for his preferences. Linda listened with a kind of relief that does not show itself in tears or laughter, but in the loosening of muscles at the base of the neck. Monica drew breath to speak the only sentence she had planned, the one she had carried in reserve since the moment the flame touched paper. She did not look at the phones. She did not seek the crowd. She looked at the person who had chosen theater over policy and gave him the decency of precision. "The check you just burned is my lawful dividend." The words arrived without italics. They did their work without force. In their wake, you could feel people rearranging themselves, as if they had stepped off a moving walkway and were startled to find the floor still. Somewhere near the door, the teenager lowered his phone by an inch and said "oh" without adding anything else. The Chanel coat's hand lifted to her throat and rested there, a steadier. The custodian took his foot off the bucket's wheel and let it be. Richard stepped back, sweat breaking across his brow. The question in every gaze, what would he do next? The ash on the marble had settled into a crescent that caught the tree lights like a thin shoreline. Phones hovered, lenses training themselves on the iPad, where authority did not blink. The regional line was live in Linda's hand, a faint voice copped by the handset, and the room had begun to relearn the sound of facts. Monica let the silence complete its work. She had not come for a spectacle. She had come for a transaction conducted with courtesy. But the lobby had become a classroom, and lessons, once begun, asked to be finished. She closed the audit pane, kept the crest in the upper corner visible, and spoke in a voice that warmed the air without softening the message. There are two paths, she said, measuring each syllable so that every person, those in the lobby and those behind the glass of 1,000 screens, could hear it cleanly. The first is simple. A public apology on the record, here and now. Immediate demotion with loss of bonus. A period of community service to repair what pride has torn. The second path is also simple. Termination today and a referral for federal review. She did not harden her tone for the second path. She did not need to. Justice does not shout to be heard. The outline of her terms drew itself through the room. Even the teenagers with phones felt it and quieted, the way a gym falls silent when a coach explains the rules that keep bodies safe. Linda lowered her eyes and then raised them, relief and resolve sharing space on her face. The guard opened her stance another inch, as if to say that making room is also a form of protection. Chloe steadied her tripod and whispered to her audience that they should listen closely now, because clarity is a rare kindness in public life. Richard tried to find his voice where he had left in brightness, in performance, in the practiced rhythm of a manager who confuses decisiveness with accuracy. "Miss Harris," he began, then swallowed the late arrival of respect and started again. "Miss Harris, the institution appreciates your engagement. Perhaps if we took this offline." Linda, still on the line, covered the mouthpiece and said quietly, "Sir, Regional is holding. They have confirmed the authorizations." She did not say, "You have seen them." She did not need to. Monica left the iPad where it rested and folded her hands lightly on either side, as a person might hold a book open for a classroom to see. "This is not about humiliation," she said. "It is about repair. When the public wrong is done, the repair must also meet the public." Somewhere behind Richard's eyes, the math of pride and consequence began to add itself up. He turned, very slightly, toward the phones that had once been allies, and found only glass looking back. He looked at the ash, and the ash did not offer him a story. It offered him only what it was. "We can prepare a statement," he said, reaching again for the tool he trusted. "Corporate communications will want it." "Corporate communications," Monica said, and the phrase landed without mockery, "will be very pleased that we honor policy and dignity today." She shifted her attention from Richard to the room, and the room leaned forward. "We will proceed with the first path if it is chosen now." One. Outside, Fifth Avenue made its winter music tires in slush, a driver's one polite tap of a horn, the breath of buses at the curb. Inside, the choir track changed to a carol that people learn in childhood and hum without thinking. The lobby became, for a moment, a small town square. In squares, apologies save people more often than punishments do. Chloe's chat caught the turn and slowed, as if the word apology had a gravitational pull. A few viewers typed it out in full, letters, not numbers, like a vowel. Apology. Richard's jaw worked once in a motion that could have been resolve or stubbornness. He glanced at Linda, and the glance said, "Help me find a door." She offered one. "Sir," she said, soft but firm, "I can draft the statement right here and print it for signature. The regional line is ready to log it." The teller at the side counter, who had finally stopped pretending to staple, lifted a ream of paper onto the printer tray, as if she had been waiting all afternoon to hand someone supplies for truth. Richard took a breath and tried one more step along the only path he knew. "We should be careful not to set a precedent," he said. The sentence sounded tired when it met the crest on the screen. Monica did not answer the sentence. She answered the fear underneath it. "The precedent we set," she said, "is that we correct our errors where we made them. That is what trust sounds like in the lobby." He looked at the phones again and saw less theater there than record. He looked at the Chanel code and saw that her nod had become a hand at her throat. He looked at the teenager and saw the phone had dropped a fraction, not out of boredom but because awe has weight. He looked at the guard and saw space where pressure had been. He looked, finally, at Linda, and saw a colleague who wanted to keep a job by doing it. "Two paths," Monica repeated. not a threat, only an accounting. An apology with consequences that repair, or termination and referral. The original line crackled softly in Linda's palm, present and patient. She relayed the terms in a calm inventory and waited. The voice on the other end answered in a tone that made collaboration sound like responsibility rather than concession. Linda nodded once, then twice, and met Monica's eyes as if to pass a candle from one pair of steady hands to another. They will log the apology in real time, she said. They suggest we begin. Richard lifted a hand and let it fall to the counter, fingers landing near the edge of the iPad as if he wanted to touch the crest and could not. He started to speak and could not find punctuation inside his breath. The silence gave him back his outline, a man with a title, standing in a room that had taught him how fragile a title is when it is held up against a person's worth. He had performed certainty for long enough that it had begun to feel like truth. Now truth stood before him with its receipts. Monica did not lean. She did not press. She simply kept the door open and let him walk toward it. Begin with the facts, she said, guiding rather than commanding. State what you did. State why it was wrong. State who it harmed. Then ask to repair it. He blinked as if the list were salt, cleansing and stinging at once. His first attempt broke on the edge of pride. If anyone was offended, he stopped. You could almost see the sentence remove its costume. He began again. I burned the check on the branch floor. The room absorbed the words. He added, voice lower, I made assumptions about a customer based on appearance. The sentence seemed to cost him, and perhaps for the first time that day, the cost was a fair price. That was wrong. Linda's fingers moved, not like a stenographer capturing scandal, but like a clerk recording repair. Chloe let the microphone do the work while she kept herself transparent to the moment. The guard's eyes shone and then cleared. The teller exhaled. The custodian, who had not moved his bucket for many minutes, lifted the mop and rested it lightly across the rim, as if to say, we will clean after. Continue, Monica said gently. I disrespected Miss Harris, he said, putting the name in place the way a person replaces a misplaced photograph on the mantle. I disrespected our policy, and I disrespected the community we serve. He looked down, not for effect, but because there are sentences that make the floor seem safer than faces. I apologize. The room received the apology not as triumph, but as a turn. Monica nodded once, a small signal that a hinge had swung. Consequences, she said, the word unadorned. He hesitated, and she supplied the scaffold again. Demotion now, loss of bonus, community service. He reached for the last habit, bargaining. A review. Demotion now, she repeated. And the kindness in her tone made the repetition feel like shelter rather than force. Loss of bonus. Community service at a financial literacy center each weekend for 6 months. Linda will record the terms. The regional line will log them. I will sign the memo as chair. You will sign as manager. She paused. And you will mean the apology you just said. A flush rose on his neck, pride arguing with something older and better. I will mean it, he said. It landed without the usual lacquer. Linda typed and read back what she had written, each clause a plank in a small bridge they were building for the room to walk across. The printer hummed, slow and busy, and then presented the paper like a flag someone had ironed. Monica took a pen from her coat pocket, one of those practical pens that write every time a person asks them to. She signed the memo with a signature that matched the one on the board portal. Not for show, but for record. She handed the pen to Richard. He held it, a simple instrument, suddenly heavy. He lowered himself toward the paper, found the line with his name, and signed. The sound of pen on paper is small. In the lobby, it sounded like weather changing. Read your apology aloud, Monica said. Not to punish him, but to let the room hear the words in the voice that had once burned the check. He read it. This time, no sentence ran away from him. When he reached the end, he let the paper fall to the counter and stood without the squaring of shoulders he had used as armor all morning. On the live stream, comments shifted again, some soft with surprise, some stubborn in retreat, many simply quiet, as if the space after an apology knows to lower its voice. Monica nodded to Linda. File it, she said. Send to regional. Notify corporate communications that we handled this at the branch with policy and courtesy. Linda's hands moved, and somewhere beyond the ceiling, servers made the small, invisible gestures that carry truth to where it must be kept. The custodian finally rolled his bucket forward and asked, with a kindness that framed the question, "Do you want the ash gone now?" Monica looked at the crescent that had learned to glitter. "Not yet," she said. "Let it remind us what fire takes when we use it wrong." The guard stood a touch easier. The teller returned to her station with a face that had learned something it would not forget. Chloe lowered her camera and said to her viewers that she would post the policy links and a transcript of the apology. And then she thanked the room for letting facts be audible. Richard's hands trembled once and then were still. He looked at Monica with a new expression, one that left room for the possibility that discipline could be a kind of mercy. He opened his mouth to say something, gratitude or chagrin, and the words did not arrive. Monica spared him the search. "There will be training," she said. "There will be supervision. There will be service." He nodded. A man who had earlier cheered now stared at his shoes. The woman in the Chanel coat pressed 2 fingers to the corner of each eye and blinked the room back into focus. The teenager whispered to his dream that he had never seen an adult change course like that in public. The brass clock announced the new minute with the gentlest click. Monica turned back to the counter. "Linda," she said, "please return my wallet." Linda did so with both hands, the way a person returns a borrowed book. Monica thanked her, and in the thanks was an invitation for Linda to keep choosing the right voice when rooms get loud. The guard asked if Monica needed an escort to the door. Monica said no, and then added, "Thank you, ma'am," because respect, when offered, multiplies. Chloe angled her camera toward the street, the cabs, the wool hats, the red scarves, and then back to the lobby, where the printer tray was empty and the memo lay signed. She told her audience that she would stay live a few minutes longer. She did not know what would happen next, but she had learned that day to leave room for repair. Monica gathered her folder. She looked at the iPad and let the crest sleep. The screen dimmed, then darkened, leaving her reflection faint and then gone. The meeting she had planned to chair had already begun without her. It could finish correctly now. She turned, not to leave yet, but to give the room the grace of one more steady breath. Richard's knees bent, as if the day had added weight to gravity. He reached for the counter, missed it, and found steadiness on his own. He did not look at the phones, he looked at the ash. Then he looked at Monica with a face that had learned how to be new. Richard knelt and whispered, "I choose to apologize." The room held its breath after the signed apology, as if the air itself needed a moment to understand that a turn had finally arrived. Phones lowered by small degrees. The printer cooled. The carol above the lobby changed to something old and forgiving, and people found their voices again in the modest ways. Americans to someone cleared a throat, someone murmured, "Thank you," someone offered a chair. Monica accepted none of the fanfare. She stood at the counter with her folder closed and the iPad asleep, thanked Linda for filing the memo, and asked the guard if she could borrow a pen one last time. She wrote the words "Branch Compliance Review Schedule" on a note card and handed it across, not as a threat, but as a promise that work would follow where words had finally gone first. From the original line came a final confirmation. The apology had been logged, the terms accepted, and the audit stamped. In the livestream chat, the noise thinned to a steady hush, the way a congregation settles after a hymn. The apology did not erase the ash on the marble, and that, too, mattered. When the custodian asked whether he should mop it now, Monica shook her head and said she would prefer to keep it in place a little longer as a witness. She thanked him by name, because names make witnesses less lonely, then turned to the room and spoke in a voice more warm than stern. She outlined, with the careful cadence of a person who has chaired more meetings than most people attend, what would happen next. There would be immediate retraining for the staff, not as a script to memorize, but as a practice to recover. There would be an independent oversight panel with community seats reserved so that policy could answer to people rather than only to paper. There would be a formal protocol with a plain name dignity. First, that required preservation of documents, verification before judgment, and courtesy in every step. No bullet points, no slogans. Just the kind of steady sentences older listeners have trusted their whole lives. A woman in the Chanel coat lowered her hand from her throat and nodded without performance. The teenager in the vestibule said softly to his audience that he had never seen an adult say, "I was wrong," and then make a plan to fix it in the same breath. The barista in the green apron understood immediately the discipline in that plan. Hospitality and banking are cousins when dignity is the measure. Linda printed packets while the teller assembled clipboards. Richard stood not in exile, but in a new posture, as if someone had adjusted the picture frame of his job until it finally hung straight. A few minutes later, only a few, because repair should begin while the memory of harm is still honest. Monica asked for a small glass shadow box from the branch supply closet. She lifted the crescent of ash with the edge of a stiff card and let it slide gently into the frame. She straightened the small brass plaque at the bottom that read, in letters so plain they were almost shy, "Preserve first, verify next, decide last." She placed the box on a low table where every customer would pass it on the way to the teller line, not as a rebuke, but as a reminder that institutions are only as careful as the moments when no one is watching. The choir track slipped into silence between songs, and in that small quiet you could hear pens moving, printers chuffing, and the soft rustle of people choosing to be better. The world beyond the glass did not stand still. Cabs nosed through slush, a bus sighed at the curb. Across Avenue, a bell on the red kettle rang with the gentle persistence of someone who knows change arrives $1 at a time. Chloe ended her live stream with a brief note that she would post links to policy and to a transcript of the apology, then lowered her camera and, for the first time that afternoon, slipped her phone into her jacket pocket without looking at it. She took a breath and smiled in the small, private way people do when they have seen proof that steadiness works. When the last packet had been distributed and the box settled into its place, Monica asked Linda to return her wallet. She thanked the guardian. "Thank you, ma'am, for the space and the patience." She thanked the custodian for waiting with a mop and asked him to give the marble a careful pass now, because the ash had found a resting place where it could keep speaking. She thanked the teller for quiet courage. She thanked Richard, too, not for the morning, but for the words that had followed it. Gratitude is a tool as sharp as any sanction when it is used to bind people to the way they ought to be. The branch returned to its heartbeat once Monica stepped back from the counter. People resumed their business with a new kind of attention. The guard opened the door for a family in wool hats and told them, with a softness that sounded like home, that they could take their time. The printer hummed with packets for the next shift. Some were above the ceiling. Servers captured the day's record in places where it could not be edited by memory. Monica glanced at the brass clock and saw that the hour had moved forward without her permission. Her meeting had started and continued without her. It would finish correctly because of what had happened here. 6 months later, on a warm Saturday that came dressed in the easy clothes of early summer, a different room learned a different lesson. The Harlem Financial Literacy Center smelled like pencil shavings and copier toner and the faint sweetness of hand soap. Folding chairs stood in careful rows, and posters on the wall explained interest, budgeting, and how to argue with a credit report without losing your lunch break. Children colored at a table near the door, while their parents sorted paper into neat stacks. The light through the windows made patient squares on the floor. Richard arrived on time, with a notepad tucked under his arm, and the kind of nervous smile people wear when they have decided that humility is safer than pride. He took a seat at the low table with a family new to the country, a mother and father who spoke English with a strong melody of another tongue, and a boy whose eyes showed the quick arithmetic of a fourth grader. Richard did not speak first. He listened while the mother explained that they had been paying fees they did not understand and were ready to stop being shy about asking questions. He nodded. He drew 3 boxes on a blank page and labeled them in plain words: rent, food, savings, then asked the boy to choose a color for each. The boy chose blue for savings and pressed the crayon so hard the wax shone. Richard smiled. "Blue is a good color for keeping," he said, and the boy nodded as if this were a law of physics. When the father asked about a credit score, Richard explained gently how lenders read patterns the way teachers read homework and how a late payment can be a lesson, not a sentence. He did not speak about himself. He did not need to. His pen moved. His posture bent in, not down. He said sir and ma'am as if the words had just been minted and handed to him. Monica visited the center that afternoon. not as a chair with an entourage, but as a neighbor. She wore a cotton dress and carried cupcakes from the bakery around the corner, where the owner slips one extra into a box when he hears a good story. She made a circuit of the room, no rushing her step, every greeting in place. She stopped at the low table where Richard sat and listened without interrupting. She watched his pen annotate a bill without indignation and circle a predatory fee without dramatics. When the mother thanked him for not making them feel small, he said, "You are doing the hard part by showing up," and meant it. Monica caught his eye and chose a quiet nod, the kind that says a person has done a thing correctly and is welcome to keep doing it. The protocol they had promised in the branch had not become a plaque on the wall and nothing else. It had become a series of small, stubborn habits. Tellers paused before prejudice, managers preserved before pronouncing. An oversight committee met in a modest conference room once a month and read not only numbers, but letters from customers' handwritten notes, typed sentences, comments from people who do not ordinarily write to banks because they do not expect to be heard. The memorial box sat in the Fifth Avenue lobby, no longer glittering, only calm. Children sometimes pressed their noses to the glass and asked why ashes would live in a frame. Parents explained, haltingly at first, then with the confidence of practice, that reminders help grown-ups remember what they forget when they get in a hurry. There was a ceremony that summer, not a grand one, but enough to place a ribbon across the little table where the box rested. A city council member read a citation that sounded less like politics and more like neighborliness. A retired teacher from the block offered a blessing that felt like chalk dust and sunlight. Monica spoke briefly. She did not use the word legacy. She used the word habit. She said that most of what saves us arrives as a habit we decide to keep. She looked around the lobby and said that the habit here will be to greet every person like a person first. After the ribbon was cut, a local radio station set up a small booth near the teller line for interviews. The host wore headphones and an expression that said he loved his job enough to be careful with it. He had a voice made for evenings in kitchens where soup simmers and windows fog. He asked simple, honest questions and waited for the answers to come at their own pace. When Monica stepped into the booth, he welcomed her with a kind of courtesy older listeners trust. He asked her to tell the story in her own words, because stories behave better when they are handed to their owners. She told it without embroidery, the way she had managed the day in the branch. Preserve, verify, decide, apology, consequence, repair. He then asked what would come next. She spoke about training, oversight, and the work of keeping rules in human hands so they do not harden into excuses. She talked about diners and church basements and barbershops, the small rooms where trust is built with coffee and conversation, and the willingness to listen when someone's voice shakes. She said the habit would need tending. She said they would tend it. Toward the end, the host lifted his eyes from his notes and offered the kind of question that does not look clever on paper but matters in the ears of people washing dishes. He asked if the city had learned something it would keep, or if it had only learned to be on its best behavior when the camera was on. She waited a beat before answering, because the beat itself was part of the truth. She said she believed in the steadiness of people more than in the hunger of moments. She said that reminders help and structures help, and that nothing helps as much as a room deciding to be decent when no one is watching. When the interview ended, she stepped back into the lobby, where the glass box caught the afternoon like a small harbor. A grandfather in a brim hat read the plaque aloud to a girl in braids, who asked if deciding last meant she could keep thinking for a long time before she spoke. He said yes, and the yes sounded like a piano in an empty church. Richard lingered by the door as folks filed out, not to collect praise, but to hold it open. He thanked people by name when he could. He promised a woman he would call on Monday morning to fix a stubborn fee. He did not rush the goodbyes. As the day rounded its shoulder toward evening, a reporter with a small camera and a clipboard approached Monica near the memorial box and asked for a few words. She agreed, and the camera light blinked red. The questions were simple. What had happened? What had changed? What would stay changed? She answered in the careful sentences that make sense over dinner tables. Then the reporter, thinking of viewers whose patience is thinner than their hope, asked the thing that most people wonder in private and rarely say out loud. A question rose in the interview. Had the city truly learned from this lesson? Or would it repeat itself somewhere else? The quiet of that final scene lingered long after the voices and cameras had gone, like the hush in a church after the last hymn. What began as a moment of humiliation grew into an unexpected lesson in humility, apology, and repair. In the ashes of a burn check, people saw not only the folly of prejudice, but the possibility of change when truth is spoken clearly and dignity is held fast. The heart of it all is simple. Prejudice can wound, but compassion and accountability can mend. Justice is not only about rules. It is about the courage to face mistakes, the grace to offer second chances, and the patience to build habits of fairness in the everyday. Much like the steady flame of a porch light that waits for a traveler to come home, small acts of respect can guide us safely through the darker roads of life. So perhaps tonight, as you think back on your own journey, consider the quiet gifts of kindness you have received and those you might pass along. If this story has touched your spirit, let it remind you to share that warmth with someone who needs it most.